Ted Cruz went on Fox News and talked about the Republican tax plan that they're currently working on. And he engaged in what can only be described as a war on math and common sense. So let's watch, and then I'll break it down and explain to you why it's preposterous.
Senator, we just blew past not that long ago $20 trillion in the national debt. There are going to be folks in this town, ironically, a lot of Democrats all of a sudden, who are going to be talking about deficits. And conservatives are concerned about deficits. Are you guys willing to go really big on tax cuts, even if it's not deficit neutral?
Absolutely, and this is critical. If it's not deficit neutral, it's not a tax cut. Mm-hmm. And look, one of the things to remember, the way Washington scores tax cuts, they consistently underestimate the economic growth impact of tax cuts.
Like the dynamic scoring.
That's exactly right. One of the reasons I am such a passionate advocate for a big, serious tax cut is because I'm very worried about the deficit and debt. And the only way we're going to turn it around is economic growth. There is no way Congress is going to find the backbone to cut enough to get out of the debt. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen with Democrats. It's not even going to happen with most Republicans. The only way we get out of this hole that we've dug ourselves is getting out of the anemic Obama era 1% and 2% growth, getting back to robust 3%, 4%, 5% GDP growth. That generates so much revenue that's how you end up paying out down the deficit debt.
Okay, so understand the argument he's making here, and also realize that this is always 100% of the time the Republican argument and answer on what to do with the economy and what to do with taxes. So what he's saying is, listen, when you deregulate and you cut taxes, now to be clear, what they're talking about is tax cuts for the rich. They don't say it. But when you look at their plans, their proposals, always, they either keep taxes the same for the poor and the middle class, or they raise taxes for the poor and the middle class, and they cut taxes for the rich. So let's just be crystal clear about what's actually going on here, because they say tax cuts, and sometimes they'll just flat out lie and say, oh, it's tax cuts for the middle class. But then when you look at their plans, like Trump's, for example, they take the bottom bracket from 10% and make it 12%. Which means what? Which means you're raising taxes on the poor and the middle class. So that's their little sleight of hand trick. When they say, oh, cut taxes, they really mean cut taxes for the rich. But anyway, when he says that, the argument is, when you cut taxes for the rich, well, what's going to happen is you're going to unleash the beast of the private sector in the free market economy. And then there's going to be tremendous growth. So right now, hey, we only have 1%, 2% growth. Well, we're going to get like 4% growth. And at a different point of that interview, you didn't see it there, but he goes on to talk about under Reagan, 7% growth is what we got. So in other words, you cut taxes for the rich and you deregulate the economy. And then the free market capitalism takes off and does its job. And the wealth trickles down. And then also, even though you just cut the tax rate, there's going to be more revenue going into the government because there's so much growth in the economy that even though you cut the rate, the tax rate, you have more revenue going into the government. So do you understand that? Now, one would look at math, and this is why I call this a war on math, and go, hey, wait a second. If you're cutting taxes, you are literally cutting the percentage that these, people in the top 10% and top 1% would pay in taxes. What are you doing? What are you doing there? You're cutting the amount of revenue that goes into the government. So what do you mean it's going to decrease the deficit and decrease the debt? That doesn't make any sense. You're saying we're going to decrease the debt and the deficit by cutting the amount of money that's given to the government, which can go to reduce the debt or the deficit. I mean, that's a war. That's why I call it a war on math and common sense, is because that makes absolutely no sense. That's like me telling you, hey, look, you're going to get, I know I owe you $1,000, but look, you're going to get that money faster if you just cut the amount of money I give you every month. So I'm supposed to give you $100 a month until I pay off the $1,000. Well, what if I gave you $75 a month until I paid off that $1,000? You'd be like, what? Then it's going to take longer to pay off the $1,000. I go, no. But really, by me cutting the amount I give you, well, that somehow increases the amount of money I give you. What the fuck? Now, granted, it's a little different because it has to do with percentages. So, the argument is, hey, I'm giving you 1% of my income every month until I pay off the $1,000, and that 1% becomes a much larger raw number because when you cut taxes, the income goes up so much that the 1% is a bigger chunk. But here's the main point. And actually, it's not just a war on math and common sense, it's also a war on history. That never fucking happens historically. So when have we deregulated and cut taxes for the rich? Well, in the fucking roaring 20s, what happens? A boom-bust cycle. That's what happens. So every time you deregulate and cut taxes for the rich, woo, look at this, oh, the economy's taking off, this is amazing growth, and oh shit, then it all just went away and there was a giant crash. Under George W. Bush. Massive deregulation, massive tax cuts for the rich. Oh my God, look, everything's going so well. The year is 2006 and the growth seems infinite. Oh my God, it's 2008 and everything fucking collapsed and we had a subprime mortgage crisis. So now, we're going through the same shit now. Obama reinflated the bubble, but now you got Trump doing more deregulation and now they're pushing even bigger tax cuts for the rich, going right back to the Bush rates, and they're making the same old arguments like we don't have any historical evidence. So, here's the deal. You're gonna fucking crash the economy. There's gonna be a giant crash at some point. We already know that, okay? But you have to pick one or the other, Ted. So in other words, do you care more about deficit reduction or do you care more about tax cuts? The idea that by cutting taxes, you're gonna also reduce the deficit is simply not true. The way to reduce the deficit would be to raise taxes. But they can't have that. But so this is like, it's just one of these classic Republican contradictions that nobody questions. Like, for example, with abortion. At the same time that Republicans say we want to have fewer abortions and ideally we want no abortions, but we need to cut the number of abortions. And then in the next breath they go, oh, and by the way, we want to defund Planned Parenthood and stop pushing condoms and the pill and sex education. And then guess what? When you cut all those things, when you say none of that stuff, well, then you're going to have an increase in the abortion rate. Duh! But they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to say, oh no, we want to get rid of Planned Parenthood and sex education and condoms and the pill and all that stuff. And we also want to decrease the abortion rate. But that won't happen. It's going to go up if you cut those things. That's a guarantee. Well, same thing here. We're going to cut taxes for the rich and deregulate. And we also want to lower the deficit. If you cut taxes for the rich and deregulate, you're going to increase the deficit. Look at what happened under George W. Bush. He did exactly what you're advocating for. Cut taxes for the rich and deregulate, and he exploded the debt and the deficit. And by the way, a lot of that also had to do with the fact they fucking waged multiple wars and put it on the national credit card. So but the point is, nobody questions this. These idiots are sitting around having this cackling conversation. Wouldn't it be great? Oh, yes, aren't Democrats so stupid? Yeah, Democrats are so stupid. Anyway, we're going to cut taxes and deregulate, and then that's going to make it so that the deficit goes down. They're on another goddamn planet, and that's what's so frustrating about this. I'm reminded of a lot of the centrist talking points in the midst of this conversation here, where, people who aren't really deep into politics, might say something along the lines of, if only the two sides can get along, wouldn't it be great if the Democrats and the Republicans can work out solutions and meet in the middle? And the midpoint between these two parties, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have compromise and meet there? But here's the fact of the matter. That's a dumb belief. That's a dumb thing to say. That's a dumb thing to think. And actually, to be fair, it's not dumb, it's ignorant. Because that's just a lazy assumption that, well, look, if you just take the midpoint between two people in an argument, well, that's obviously going to be reasonable, right? But the response is, what if one side is demonstrably, provably, clearly incorrect? Well, then if you meet in the middle, you're saying, let's do a half incorrect strategy. Let's be half wrong. So sometimes the midpoint is not the answer. Sometimes, when you talk about stuff like the economy and certain policy proposals, it's the equivalent of Hey, I believe in creationism. Hey, I believe in evolution. Well, let's go to the midpoint. God created something and then that led to evolution. No, there's fucking no evidence for that. You know, it's just a lazy assumption of the person who doesn't read a lot about the policies from the different parties. That's what that is. That's I want to contribute to the conversation, but I don't really have anything to say because I didn't really read about what's going on. So the midpoint is just, why can't we all just fucking get along and understand that it makes sense to push a policy that's in the middle of waging a war on math and believing in math. Let's only believe math is bullshit half the time. Let's do that, you know? So let's do deregulation, and then also we'll do some democratic policies because, hey, midpoint, right? Wouldn't that work? No! Deregulation and tax cuts for the rich are a horrible idea. You just gotta pay attention to what's going on and realize that some of these people in the national debate are charlatans, okay? The Republican Party, yes, the Democrats are bad in a sense that they've sold out to Wall Street and they've sold out to corporate interests to a large extent. Of course they have. But however much the Democrats have sold out, the Republicans have sold out even more. So they're like 100% the corporate puppet party. 100%. And then you mix that in with, you know, some theocratic fundamentalist beliefs on social issues, and there's the Republican Party. Let's be as backwards as we can socially, and let's be horrific when it comes to economic policy, screw over poor people and middle-class people, and serve the corporations, and all the while pretend like we're doing things that are great. So that's who they are, and if you want to get caught up in rhetoric and whatnot, well, then maybe you might think they're not monstrous, but the policies they push indeed are monstrous, and they make absolutely no sense, and here's a clear example of it.